Upon passing the envelope to me, they made no effort to meet my gaze. Time flies, 30 years pass in 60 seconds. Excuse me, but no. Absence of pomp and circumstance. It is indecent. All I had was a manila folder and a voicemail from an unknown person telling me to have my office done by 5, a span of 3 days. My retirement benefits did not vest until that point. They abandoned me like old printer paper 3 days too soon after 30 years of impeccable service at Aerotech Solutions. I ought to have sobbed, should have pleaded. They were anticipating that. I simply grinned, though, reason being they were completely unaware of their potential adversary. I was poised to unleash a tempest, but they couldn't see past the awkward handshake and kind farewell. I had been observing, and they had no idea. Keeping track of information, keeping track of duplicates, paying attention even when they believed no one was watching. They assumed I was no different from any other senior compliance officer, someone who would silently retire early after collecting her small collection of office knickknacks. They were mistaken. What they were unaware of was that I had been secretly maintaining an archive for the past 4 years. Emails, memos, submitted false data, quiet discussions taking place in private. Every single one of them was mine. I had had enough of defending them when they shoved me out of the way right before the finish line. Are you in favor of armed conflict? I have faith in you. I will not go silently. I am not leaving. Your sleazy severance documents will not be signed by me. Hi, I'm Linda Parker. My age is 62. A widow, a woman who is a mother. The biggest aerospace engineering corporation in the Midwest. Aerotech Solutions employed me until last Friday afternoon in the role of Director of Ethics and Compliance. I worked in the same office building outside of Kansas City for the final 30 years of my life. From being a middle-tier supplier of aviation components to a national defense contractor, I witnessed the company's meteoric rise. I endured 6 chief executive officers, dozens of organizational changes, and 100 or more policy revisions. I maintained a low profile, played by the rules, and made sure everyone else did the same. I played it straight. My voice was soft. I was the one who probed into the audit trails that nobody wanted to look at. I was the one who asked the unsettling questions. Doing a good job was always more important to me than ascending the ladder, just because that's my upbringing. For 40 years, my dad was an employee of the city, never complained, never became rich. However, his neighborhood associates him with a certain significance. On top of that, I wished my name had some significance. At first, I was not compliant. My first job out of college was in accounting, where I answered phones and sorted bills. However, the data told me tales that were invisible to others. When a vendor's payments suddenly increased, a report didn't match up with shipping records, or someone casually forgot to include an expense number on a travel reimbursement, I would take note. People began to seek me out as time went on, in silence, subtly asking, "Could you please have a look at this?" I was not a police officer, but I was meticulous. Something seemed odd. After a while, I started doing my own studies into sensitive topics that nobody else wanted to touch. There was never any glitz to it, not always simple, because I was too busy attempting to decipher numbers that no one wanted me to. I was unable to attend birthday parties, school performances, or anniversaries. 12 years ago, my husband Mark passed away. Cancer. As a means of coping with my loss, I immersed myself in my job. His passing occurred while my daughter Erica was a college student. She proposed quitting school and returning home, but I discouraged her. Nobody would have liked that more than Mark. I determined to put forth more effort. Term was extended. Accepted all projects. If I was careful and did everything correctly, I could create a future that would be strong enough to support us both, I thought. Yes, I did. I held on to every scrap. I have always paid my mortgage on time, send Erica to graduate school, all the while keeping the calm confidence that I will be able to retire with grace, that my promised pension would be ready for me when I needed it, my pension that I had earned. I was an ardent supporter of Aerotech for 3 decades. Unfortunately, allegiance only works in one direction. I was let go by Brian Callister, who had barely been on the job for a year. He sported a sharp suit, a mission statement thick on buzzwords, and an infectiously condescending grin all the way from New York. In reality, what he meant by operational purification was a slash-and-burn strategy in which departments were eliminated. Software was substituted for human workers, and in-house functions were outsourced. His changes began to skirt regulation, but I remained professional and flagged them formally and respectfully. I refrained from yelling or making threats. Instead, I submitted the risks, logged the irregularities, and did exactly what was required of me in my role. I was unimpressed. I've seen men like him before. They believe ethics are optional if the numbers look good. Then all of a sudden, I was whisked away from important meetings. My memos were redirected. The reports I had requested were unavailable, and the IT staff migrated my access without giving me any advance notice. At that point, I realized I wasn't being ignored. On the contrary, they were making plans to eliminate me. Not out of worry, but sheer need, I began making several copies of every file on my home drive, in an external drive, and in physical storage. Why? Because Brian wasn't only trying to save money. He was sweeping the ground. It was as plain as day to me, and I had no doubt that he could sense my awareness of it. I buried my head in hope, kept my chin up, and pretended my 30 years of service meant something so that I could retire. I truly did. I was prepared for what was to come when I was summoned to his office on Friday alone, without HR present. Oh, how I wished I had been mistaken. I could still be able to leave with my dignity and pension if it was all simply a miscommunication, or if they were only transferring me to a different position. I ought to have been more astute. People like Brian take your exit strategy to the next level by actually calculating it. And as for me, accurately to the hour they determined it, the aroma of ostentatiousness and pricey leather wafted across his workspace. Brian Callister didn't even glance up as I walked in. He merely motioned for me to sit, as if I were just another item on his calendar, one he was anxious to check off as I stood in the doorway for a full second, taking it all in mahogany desk, floor-to-ceiling windows, and abstract metal sculpture on a pedestal that likely cost more than my car. And the thanks for coming in. He greeted Linda with a stiff, rehearsed smile as he finally glanced up. A controlled, rehearsed tone characterized his speech. Upon noticing the manila folder on his desk, I had a sudden and overwhelming sense of dread. Your promotion will never be placed in a manila folder. Without wasting any time, he drew his hands and stated, "I'll get right to it. Your position has been deemed redundant, effective immediately because of the ongoing reorganization and budget realignment. Not because I wasn't surprised, but because I had anticipated it. What I hadn't anticipated was how brazen they would be. Consequently, I didn't cringe. Sign and return by tomorrow evening. We've also included a non-disclosure and release clause. Pretty standard. You'll receive 3 months severance. He said, touching the folder as if it were a lovely present. Tomorrow, I inquired, maintaining a calm tone. That's quite rapid. Let's make sure everything is neat and tidy, he said, reclining, as if he were at a dentist visit. No room for misunderstanding, no waiting around. There is also no witness. I was alone with the man who was attempting to delete 30 years of my life like I was a line item. There was no human resources representative, no lawyer there. You will be led to your workplace to retrieve any personal possessions. Your benefits will be terminated immediately, he said. Behaving criminally, I am escorted. I was let go without any prior notice performance problem or due process. My full pension didn't kick in for another 3 days, so they let me loose on Monday because they were afraid I would miss my payment. They clearly valued my early termination more than my 30 years of service, as every day counted. No, I kept my tears to myself. I remained silent. All I did was nod and get the folder. It seemed as if Brian had prepared answers to my anger, but was at a loss for words when I remained silent. His expression was one of disappointment. I am grateful for the opportunity, I stated firmly as I stood up. A flicker of his eye revealed his apology. Refining my grip on the folder, I said, I already thanked you for revealing the nature of the company I've been employed by. After that, I departed unruffled and collected. Panic, terror, and despair were their cards. They were completely unaware of what had just been set off. An awkward-looking security guard, young and courteous, sat outside his office. Miss Parker, I'll accompany you to your office, he said, taking care not to meet my gaze. His stance, the way he walked more slowly, so I could recover my breath. It was as if he realized this was more than just a job loss. It was a gut hit, a betrayal, a violation, and he didn't even need to say sorry. Janet, the human resources representative, who had been dispatched to my office to get my badge and accompany me on my exit, stood as still as a ghost in my office, clenching her fists and remaining silent. We had shared many memories together, including Christmas parties, potlucks, and even family photographs. But now she would also avoid making eye contact with me. She muttered, I'm really sorry, Linda, this isn't right. As I delicately set my coffee mug in the box, I uttered the word no. Everything else belonged to them, so I grabbed just the things that were important to me. A framed picture of Mark and Erica, a little ceramic plant that she gave me when we were in high school, and my ethics award from 2012, which is now sitting on the shelf collecting dust. What they were unaware of, though, and had absolutely not anticipated, was the work I had been conducting behind the scenes. I sensed something wasn't quite right before, and today was no exception. I had painstakingly recorded every irregularity, questionable change, and dated certification over the last 4 years. At first, I had used the correct method, formal reports, flagged memos, and internal channels, but they all went silent, or even worse, were forwarded to Brian's office upon his arrival. The issues were left unaddressed. They disguised them. Now they wanted me to leave before I could make the last connection. That night, I sat at my kitchen table at home, gazing at the severance paperwork. It was ridiculous, an insult disguised as kindness. 3 months' money in exchange for complete quiet. The legalese was very clear. I was signing away my pension, my right to sue, my capacity to speak, and all future claims against me. Severance wasn't it, a muzzle was. They expected us weaklings like me to be too exhausted and afraid to stand up for ourselves. They anticipated that I would be overrun, left to fend for myself. However, a crucial aspect was overlooked by them. Throughout my professional life, I have been on the lookout for trends, discrepancies, and hidden contradictions. The whole event reeked of orchestration, down to the last phrase and gesture. The goal here wasn't only to save money, a surgical procedure, strategic. Calculated. What comes next? Playing nice was over for me now. It was a peaceful night at home, relatively silent. Severance paperwork meant to be binding, definitive, and marking the end of a career lay unopened next to my cup of tepid tea as I sat in the shadowy kitchen. Still, I was wiser. This wasn't created to defend me, it was built to protect them. I'd seen contracts like that before, hurried, shrouded in legalese meant to scare, confound, and corner. I set the folder down and got to my feet. My hands quivered a little, but not from terror, but from a steady, simmering determination I hadn't felt in years. Pacing down the corridor to my home office, I passed the pictures hanging on the wall. Mark in his uniform, Erica with her first science fair ribbon, and us at the lake the summer before his diagnosis. I crouched down to the bottom row of the tall bookcase and halted in front of it. Behind a row of old binders and family albums was a steel fireproof lockbox, its surface worn from decades of usage. I turned the combination wheel and it clicked. I opened the lid. Within was all that mattered. A documented, organized, and verified 4-year silent resistance movement. I saved these notes from meetings when the statistics didn't line up, copies of emails and reports, and so on. At first, it was just out of habit. I thought someone may ask questions or decide to listen if I had them. However, nobody did. The number of anomalies also continued to rise. Some examples of this type of misconduct include forgeries of safety certification, signatures, altered component testing timestamps, invoices for supplies that were never sent, and most alarmingly, corporate emails instructing teams to clean financial records in advance of quarterly earnings calls. It was also deeply immoral. The crime was heinous. Proof was on my side. I devoted a good portion of that night to organizing the files, creating indexes, and comparing my notes to the schedule. By midnight, I had 3 complete sets, 1 to store at my bank, 1 to maintain for myself, and 1 for whatever came next. Reason being, I was well aware of who to contact. Raymond Chen was his name. Prior to his resignation 10 years ago, citing creative differences with the previous administration, Raymond had served as Aerotech's CFO. Little did anyone know that after his resignation, he went on to work for the Securities and Exchange Commission, the very body responsible for investigating cases of corporate fraud. While we did not consider each other friends, we did respect one another. He had faith in my work ethic, and I had faith in his sense of fairness. I discovered his number preserved in my contacts, undisturbed and undeleted, hidden behind years of updates. For an instant, my index finger lingered on the display. The next day, I made the phone call. He asked Linda Parker in a tone that was both shocked and kind. "Wow, it's been a while." As for me, I wished I was phoning when things were better, but I said, "It has." He began to sound worried as he remarked, "Let me guess. This has to do with Aerotech." Indeed, I was let go today, 2 days prior to the lock-in of my pension. We wait. The name of the Messiah. I attempted to go through the proper channels, but everything has been buried. I have documentation, Ray. a lot of it. Financial fraud, compliance violations, internal cover-ups. Instantly, his tone became more businesslike and acute. Sign nothing, not the severance, not the non-disclosure agreement, nothing. They're trying to silence you before you speak, he warned. I am aware. Honestly, he wanted to know whether anyone felt protected. I do, at least for the time being. All right, we'll get this done quickly. I'll set up a confidential meeting with the Kansas City SEC field office first thing Monday morning. 2 agents, Angela Brennan and James Weston, will be there. They are senior investigators. You can have faith in them. Saying I'll be ready, I gave my word. This could go south, Linda. These cases take their sweet time to resolve. The company is going to fight back hard, he cautioned. I said, I'm done watching this happen. It doesn't matter to me. We talked for about 2 hours, covering everything from processes to legal safeguards to what to expect. He explained the whistleblower protection program, ensured that the papers were disclosed correctly, and demonstrated how to keep the evidence chain of custody intact. Nearly 3 a.m. was the time I hung up, but I was completely unwearied. Awakening, I felt. Linda, we really need to wrap this up. I'd be happy to send a courier for the paperwork. Brian's voice was tight and clipped, and I let the calls go to voicemail the following day, Saturday. Janet from HR and a friendly check-in from someone-in-law were among the calls. Is this all? He wished he could tie a ribbon around my quiet. Subsequently, I replicated. And I made labels. I paired each email with its source report, and my handwritten notes, arranged them chronologically, made timelines, annotated them, and used color-coded markers to indicate inconsistencies. The task was laborious, but I had spent my whole career being thorough. After 30 years of hard work, this was the result. I went to my bank about mid-afternoon, retrieved the evidence from my safe deposit box, sealed one duplicate, gave another to a reliable friend who lived out of state, and kept the third, my main file, for myself. Just like every Saturday, Erica called that evening from Seattle. I have no plans to inform her just yet. I couldn't put on an act when I heard her voice. Mom, I noticed a change in your voice. Is everything all right? A lengthy pause followed. I was fired yesterday, I eventually stated. Are you kidding me? No, they claimed it was due to reorganization, but in reality, it's because I was unwilling to approve several of Brian's recent projects. I believe they anticipated my reluctance to remain silent. They're not going to be able to pull it off. You're so close to retiring. It was them. She sounded trembling. I'll return home. I'll take a flight tonight. No, darling, I said. I'm doing great. I've got this. Truly. Is that something you're going to resist? An air of tranquility descended upon me as I peered out the window and saw the sky turning from a deep pink to a navy. I declared, I'm going to expose it. I'm not merely going to fight it. Plus, it had been a long time since I hadn't felt little. I had a gut feeling, standing outside the federal building in downtown Kansas City, on a particularly bright Monday morning, the crisp, clean sunlight that seemed to press the reset button on the world. With the documents locked securely in the briefcase at my side, I felt neither my palms nor my heartbeat quiver, but I was anything but calm. It was time for me. Inside, the vibe was stuffy and clinical. Security checked my identification, nodded, and whisked me to the 5th floor, where an etched glass door reading United States Securities and Exchange Commission greeted me with the familiarity of an old enemy. Raymond greeted me in the foyer, his signature blend of warmth and gravity evident in his charcoal suit. You seem confident, he remarked. Of course I am. He gave the signal to start. James Weston, a forensic accountant who appeared to have not slept in 7 days and likely enjoyed it that way, and Angela Brennan, a senior enforcement attorney with sharp eyes and a notebook open before her, were the two individuals already seated when he led me into a conference room with neutral walls and a long wooden table. Handshakes were strong and introductions were brief as they stood up to welcome me. Ms. Parker, Angela said, before we move forward, I want you to know that once you tell us this, it becomes part of an official investigation. Once that happens, there's no turning back the clock. Get it, Equor? I responded, yes I do, and I am not returning. Over the course of the following 3 hours, I explained everything in detail. There were several issues that needed to be addressed, such as discrepancies between shipment logs and invoicing reports' quality assurance certifications that were backdated weeks after the products had been installed, misleading vendor contracts, shell payment accounts, and the unequivocal increase in revenue manipulation that began 6 months before Brian Callister took over, but really took off under his leadership. As James turned the pages of one set of reports, his scowl deepened. These contradictions aren't administrative, he whispered. They're intentional, and they've been bolstering profits by a minimum of 18%. I said, if you count the contracts booked but never fulfilled, it's closer to 20. And you reported these irregularities internally, Angela said, tapping her pen on the folder. Time and time again, I remarked, removing a different binder. Memos that I had drafted and sent to 3 tiers of management, as well as sent to legal and then archived and ignored, were among the contents. Once Brian came, everything changed. No one ever responded. My authority was eroded, and then not long after, I refused to approve a batch of components for military contracts. I was fired. 3 days before her pension vested, Raymond said with a folded hand. A long breath left Angela's lips as she said, that timing is not going to help them. And if this data is accurate, it's not just wrongful termination. It's securities fraud, plain and simple. James said, raising his glasses to his eyes. We will require a formal statement naturally. Subsequently, our investigation will commence. Typically, this information is kept confidential until we ascertain whether enforcement action is necessary. Angela reclined in her chair. When I wanted to know how long it would take, I just asked. She stated, it varies. However, she did acknowledge that given the amount of paperwork and the obvious paper trail, we might move fast in this particular situation. Surprisingly quickly, my phone didn't even ring when I got home. Linda, something's going on. The board has called an emergency meeting. Brian has been locked in his office all morning. There's talk that the SEC contacted legal directly, Janet said in a weak, worried voice. Thus it had started. They had experienced the initial tremor. I stated in an impartial manner, I'm not surprised. I advised them to do that. She hesitated. Linda, did you file a report? I reported everything, I said with conviction after a little pause. 3 more calls came in my direction that afternoon. One from Aerotech's lawyer, who seemed incredibly anxious to clarify the conditions of my dismissal, and another from Brian, who left a voicemail that was initially kind but quickly became abrupt. Linda, I believe we've misunderstood each other. There's no need to make this into a circus. We can still find a solution that satisfies everyone. Finally, a fresh perspective, a new voice. The board's chairman, William Monroe. Ms. Parker, he said, his voice labored and unnatural. We've looked over your recent correspondence and would like to invite you to our office to talk about your worries in more detail, maybe tomorrow morning. I was completely unprompted. A message was instead sent to my lawyer. They are welcome to visit your office, accompanied by the SEC, if they would like to have a chat. On Tuesday, the tale began to unravel. There was a brief article in the local business media that said, Aerotech faces internal review following whistleblower complaint. The article did not include any names or information, but it was enough to cause a stir in the industry. The stock price fell 12% before to lunchtime. The SEC had officially served Aerotech with an RFI by Wednesday, and federal officials had quietly contacted the company's general counsel to inquire about compliance structures, revenue reporting, and methods for dealing with whistleblower retaliation. In an instant, everyone who had been avoiding me in the break room was rushing to put some space between themselves and Brian. What about Brian? He was in a whirlwind. My resignation was allegedly the result of long-standing performance issues and a personal vendetta stemming from being denied a promotion, according to an internal interview he gave on Thursday, which was leaked naturally. Timeless strategy: challenge the whistleblower's credibility. Get down to brass tacks, get emotional, get illogical. I was not furious, though. Everything was on me. The press was not contacted, and I refrained from responding. Rather than that, I visited my bank. I had withheld certain information from the SEC until now. I came across an email chain that didn't belong in my inbox 3 years ago, while archiving old communications from our former CEO. It included 2 board members discussing optics management around a dubious acquisition and whether they should temporarily reclassify assets to maintain optimistic quarterly results. It was completely unrelated to my current projects, and at the time I wasn't even sure whether it was illegal, so I had no idea what to do with it. I had preserved it nevertheless. What was it? The setting. Pattern it was. That evening I contacted Raymond. Something that changes the timeline, I informed him, and it's new. The next morning we met, and as he perused the emails, he leaned back with narrowed eyes. If the board knew, this isn't mismanagement, he added, continuing, and this goes deeper than Callister. No, it's culture, I responded. What comes next? The moment has come to set it all on fire. On Friday morning, the storm had breached the front gates and was no longer murmuring behind closed doors. Financial reporters stuck to the only name they had: mine. Local news stations broadcast programs with names like Aerotech in Turmoil and Whistleblower Exposes Defense Contractor Fraud. What began as a peaceful probe had exploded into a full-blown business crisis. In addition to being the whistleblower at the center of Aerotech's unfolding crisis, my new title as a former senior compliance officer with over 30 years of service replaced Linda Parker, the woman they had sought to erase. Sources confirm SEC probe triggered by internal documents. Company stock tumbles amid allegations of fraudulent reporting. The story was spreading like gasoline had hit dry grass, fast and unforgiving, and although my face wasn't on screen, my name was everywhere: radio ticker tapes and online headlines. It was surreal. Lunchtime saw the stock fall another 15%. I sat calmly at home, unflinchingly watching the news while Erica yelled out from Seattle. Callister said in an interview with the Financial Journal that you were unstable and had been reprimanded for aggressive conduct. What on earth is he up to? Your mother is furious. For her own sake, I let her blow off steam. It didn't surprise me, though. The attempt to delegitimize the whistleblower by portraying them as vindictive, unreasonable, and bitter is a prime example of traditional damage control and desperation tactics. I didn't even bat an eye. Why? Because I had knowledge that Callister lacked. The SEC was actively involved, plus I had company. Raymond called that afternoon, his voice solemn yet self-assured. "We've progressed to the next stage," he announced. "Angela and James have furnished Aerotech's legal team with preliminary findings. This is sufficient to initiate a comprehensive enforcement review. They are not hesitating. The scope has just expanded." "What width?" "This is wide enough that 2 have already stepped down, and 3 board members have hired private attorneys today." Instead of jumping for joy or celebrating, my heart simply became heavier in my chest. Even if they didn't know everything, the individuals who had smiled at me in elevators, toasted me at corporate retreats, and sent Christmas cards inscribed "warmest regards" had known enough. Excessive to prevent it, they failed to do so as well. I was startled to see a face I hadn't seen since the Friday I was fired, when I answered the door to an unexpected knock later that evening. Mrs. Donnelly, the COO of Aerotech, and rumor has it the temporary chief executive officer as well. Nobody saw me unlock the door. She remained silent. She merely placed a substantial envelope in my mailbox and then disappeared. Within the envelope was an official letter from the board that retrospectively reinstated my job, restored all lost benefits, including my pension, and placed me on administrative leave pending internal review. No one was held accountable. Pure terror. The one that hides behind legalese and formalities, the one that says things like, "Please don't sue us," or "Maybe if we give you back what we stole, you'll stop talking." I felt completely misunderstood. Barbara, my attorney, saw me at her downtown office the following morning. She was as composed as ever, her spectacles resting on her nose. "They've completely lost control of the narrative," she stated. "Their only option now is to plead for containment. You possess significant leverage, Linda." "A second time they will come knocking," I warned. "They have already," she said, passing a legal document across the table. "The board has asked for a formal meeting with us, you and their outside counsel. They hope you'll cooperate and maybe declare something to the press about the company's positive internal reforms." As a hollow, exhausted sound, I laughed once. "Do they really believe I'll go and tidy up after them? People believe you will rescue them." "On Monday we will meet." The headlines had become more explicit by that point. Aerotech under investigation by federal authorities for alleged financial fraud. The company could be destroyed by a whistleblower's report. No one could find Brian Callister. Even though I knew otherwise, rumors circulated that he hadn't left his office in days and that he was supposedly already arranging a departure deal, which would have protected him from what was to come. I was silent all whole weekend, ignored the knock on my door. Despite receiving a dozen emails, I chose not to reply. Whoever claims to have inside information, be it a former coworker, a journalist, a lawyer, or even a complete stranger. Out of nowhere, everyone was trying to get a hold of me. No one could divert the storm that had engulfed the lady they had turned a blind eye to for so long. They would, however, be delayed. Reason being Monday wasn't their day. Verdicts were made on Monday. As Barbara and I entered Aerotech headquarters at exactly 10 a.m., we were welcomed instead of escorted, which made us nervous and desperate. The once sterile halls now felt dirty and guilty. As we passed, employees glanced up and down, and conversations stopped in the middle. Even the boardroom seemed different. The once proud egos are now nothing more than a group of individuals sitting around a table, trying to make it through what they'd previously chosen to overlook. Patricia Donnelly gave a subtle nod, but said nothing as William Monroe appeared slimmer and less confident among the firm's external legal staff. Everyone sat rigidly, with excellent posture and expressionless faces. With that, I took a seat. Ripped the rails off, Monroe cleared his throat and said, "Miss Parker, we appreciate you being here today. We would like to officially recognize that the company may have handled some parts of your termination poorly. We are taking this matter extremely seriously." Just as I was about to respond, Barbara cut in. "If you wish to address making amends, begin with taking responsibility." She did not come here to express general remorse. Instantly the room froze. My briefcase was opened. The email chronology that I had preserved in a different binder was laid out with yellow and red flags, each one representing a moment when someone in that room had disregarded or buried a worry. Each incident was recorded, had a date, and could not be denied as belonging to them. My tone was calm. My voice remained low. The stillness did the chopping for me. Yeah, it happened. When Monroe did speak again, it seemed as if he were pleading for a parachute, not a man in command. You would lead policy creation, training, oversight, full autonomy, starting immediately. He said, "We're prepared to offer you a consulting role in the restructured ethics division." My gaze fell upon him. In the middle of him. I told them I gave this company my all for 30 years, and then you dumped me without hesitation when you thought I was an inconvenience. You didn't just fire me, you attempted to erase me. Nobody budged. We will evaluate your proposal once we have completed our full cooperation with the SEC, Barbara said while folding her hands. There was silence. Simply put, they were unable to do so. "Miss Parker, we hope you'll speak to the investigators about the actions we're taking now. Your perspective would be invaluable," Monroe said as we stood to go. I halted at the entrance, started to return. "It's up to you whether it helps or destroys, but I'll tell them the truth." Then I got up and left. Just as they were about to quiet the woman, she abruptly closed the door. The following night, following the boardroom showdown, I sat on the back porch with a glass of water and no desire for anything stronger. A gentle spring breeze swept across the fields, carrying with it a subtle aroma of lilac and the serenity that follows the overwhelming collapse of something monumental. I was hoping for a sense of victory. I opted out. I was exhausted, still not defeated, still not uncertain, but worn out to the bone, as if some long-suppressed part of you had finally let out a breath. As I reclined in my weathered wicker chair, I could hear the gentle buzzing of the porch light. Mark and I had spent many evenings here, coffee in hand, us reading the newspaper and me planning our day. We didn't chat much after dinner, not because we were short on conversation starters, but because it wasn't necessary. Even while he would have despised the corporate corruption court battles and negative press that has surrounded us, I believe he would have been proud of us as well. Not a call, but a text message. My phone buzzed next to me. "Erica. Arrived at KCI. I rented a car. I will return home in 45 minutes. It took a while for it to sink in as I gazed at the screen. She arrived. Without consulting me or providing an explanation, my daughter had boarded the red-eye out of Seattle. She simply appeared. She would, I should have known. Around 9:47 p.m., the driveway was illuminated by headlights. As a silver SUV drew up next to the porch, a familiar woman, got out her gaze, scanning the yard, a duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Erica appeared to be older than I had recollected. Presence, maybe, rather than years. Her gait, her posture, more composed in some way. More sensible. Without uttering a word, she threw her luggage to the ground as we approached the front door and embraced me tightly. After a few moments of inaction, my arms reflexively encircled her. "Hi, Mom," she said softly. Sucking hard, I choked. I said, "Hi, darling." She would make tea, which she would do whenever she felt overwhelmed, and we stayed inside for a bit, listening to the porch door creak softly in the breeze. The chamomile flower, 2 sweets, in the same vein as her dad. Sitting across from me at the table, she offered me a cup. "I read the news release," she eventually stated. "There were also interviews. Their accusations against you are quite repulsive." Then I just shrugged. When you can't back up your claims with proof, that's what people do. Hard blinks from her. "Why, though, were you so reluctant to spill the beans earlier?" I seriously considered going. I have the ability to have been of assistance. Steam was rising from my mug, and I glanced down at it. "Because you were living it up," I remarked. "Constructing your own destiny. It was unnecessary for you to be pulled into my." She spoke softly, informing him that it was not his decision to make. "And you've dedicated your entire life to shielding me from harm. Someday I'll also have the opportunity to be there for you." Her speech lacked any trace of wrath, something else entirely, something more powerful. Due regard, I was taken aback. My tiny child had grown up. A lady was this, hard as nails, brilliant. Plus it's more like me than I had anticipated. She went on, "I've been thinking," as she ran her finger along the cup's edge, "concerning my employment, the story of my life. For the last 5 years, I've written strategy frameworks for digital businesses that see ethics as a roadblock, and I've done consultancy work for clients in which I don't believe. But something came to mind while I watched you and listened to what you did." "Just what is it?" I inquired. "That being moral isn't just essential, it's crucial." "What a force." I was slow to reply. My throat knotted up as I tried to speak. "Next month I was intending to renew my contract," she stated, "but I refused to do it. I have been looking into business law graduate schools, particularly ones with an emphasis on regulatory ethics." I moaned, "Do you intend to work as a compliance officer?" Her laughter filled the air. "Not quite. However, I would want to be present while choices are being made. I aspire to be the person that others take the time to hear. Furthermore, I will consider my life a success if it allows me to assist individuals like you in amplifying your voices." I was overcome with a myriad of emotions, pride, terror, wonder, and love as I gazed at her. Moreover, another matter. Happiness returned. Perhaps it wasn't only for Aerotech that I had been battling for all these time, for everything I had fought for, lost sleep over, sacrificed holidays for, and worked until midnight to protect, even just for me, for the sake of honesty even. Perhaps it had been on her behalf. It was to prove to her that even a timid office worker could bring down a major organization. That bravery isn't necessarily a shout. It can occasionally be found in old emails and Excel files. On rare occasions, it manifests as your daughter, stepping off an aeroplane prepared to stand by your side, as she nestled on the couch beneath Mark's weathered Afghan. Later that night, I draped a blanket over her and dimmed the lights. With her mouth slightly agape and one arm draped over her face, much like she did when she was 6 years old, she was already fast asleep. For a while longer, I lingered at the doorway, observing her. Nothing had altered. At this time, no. I had nevertheless on the inside. The goal of vengeance has shifted. We left a legacy, a small number of whispers in the business world, and an email or two from former coworkers inquiring about the veracity of the stories set off the domino effect. However, it was confirmed the week after that. The fall of aerotech wasn't occurring in a desert. All around the military industry, in conference rooms and policy binders, the tale had sparked something more fundamental. Raymond contacted me in the late afternoon on Tuesday. "You're going to find this interesting," he stated without introduction. He sent an internal document from Javelin Dynamics, another aerospace business. In it, the CEO made an announcement about an upcoming audit of their compliance practices and the need to reorganize their ethics committee. Not due to any misconduct that has been reported, but recent events in our industry have reminded us that integrity must be proven, not assumed. That is why he says it himself. That document wasn't only a response, it has to do with staying alive. As of Thursday, 3 other firms had covertly contacted the SAYs to get clarification on voluntary disclosures. As far as I could tell, a few of them were hiding something. Some were afraid they may be the next victims. The first dominoes had fallen. I wasn't innocent. I had no stake in this. The topic at hand was risk management, concerning optics. No business aspired to follow Aerotech's successful model. Instead of facing investors, no board member wanted to explain to them why they disregarded the compliance officer. It was still important, which meant there were still weak spots in the system, no matter how imperfect it was. I had even pushed one. Coverage in the media also changed. The narrative that started out as a scandal, the one about the whistleblower, the revenge, and the market crash, turned out to be about something deeper. Corporate responsibility became the subject of feature articles in national media. It's the watchdogs, aren't they? The high cost of silence, compliance officers speak out. The woman who sparked the audit wave. I was even referred to as such in one piece. The spotlight was too much for me. However, I saw its significance. My attorney Barbara advised that I think about giving a public speech with great care, in a strategic sense. So long as I didn't get into case details, the SEC was fine with it. So I agreed. It was modest at first, a discussion group at the Kansas City Business Forum. Afterwards, a network for compliance officers will have a virtual keynote. The month came to a close with an invitation to speak before a gathering of Washington, D.C. policymakers. My speech's central argument was straightforward. Silence has a cost. Audacity works as well. Use caution before making a decision. Many of the guests then came forward to express their gratitude. Separately, a lady representing a transportation technology firm grabbed me. "I've been putting off writing this report for months," she murmured slightly. For financial gain from government subsidies, members of our senior staff have been tampering with carbon offset statistics. Until I read about you, I was too timid to speak up. I handed her Angela Brennan's number while she sobbed. Raymond has a valid point. Everything was worse than we anticipated. It was larger than anticipated, though, reason being other individuals were now taking the lead. Report filing, launching the research, pulling out the questions they'd buried in an effort to avoid confrontation or lose their employment. Internal Compliance Integrity Unit was established by the SEC to deal with the influx of whistleblower claims from transportation logistics and aerospace businesses. In fact, they sought my advice on their intake procedures. It was my agreement, just for fun. For the purpose of confirming assumptions alone. I say this because I know there are more people like me in the world, people who work in offices without windows, who are weighed down by data and uncertainty, who wonder if what they've witnessed was genuine or if they're really alone. I needed them to understand that wasn't the case. A reckoning had developed into a ripple back at Aerotech. The board lost 4 members. 2 persons have been charged. Callister is charged with several federal offenses. There was a radical shakeup in the ethics department, which resulted in a doubling of personnel and a shift in reporting away from executive oversight. Now that she is officially CEO, Patricia Donnelly provided me quarterly reports out of her own volition, not obligation. Her intention was to convey the message, we're trying, and I trusted her word. No, the business did not go bankrupt, yet things evolved. Moreover, it was noticed by others, for the simple reason that there is just one voice. And there were 1,000 more who mustered the nerve to do the same. Not everything fell apart at once. That is never the case. Large corporations are not as fragile as a broken glass. At first, they make a public spectacle of their groaning as they buckle under the weight of secrets they promised would remain hidden. When that happens, they lose it. The world of Aerotech burst open on national television 10 days after the SEC widened its inquiry. A breaking news story was aired by CNN at 8:00 a.m. Defense contractor CEO under federal probe. Alleged misconduct may extend back 5 years. As I sipped my coffee in my living room, I watched as 2 guys in ordinary suits flanked Brian Callister as he was brought into a black vehicle. His normally flawless tie was now slightly crooked, and he had a pale complexion and tensed jaw. Observing his downfall in the slow, methodical pace of justice was bizarre, unlike in a huge courtroom play. Effective immediately, Brian Callister has been terminated for cause. Aerotech announced in a press release published within hours. Because of the mistakes made while he was in charge, the board of directors is quite disappointed. Very disheartening. They referred to it by that name. No, not at all. Not denying it. Not avarice. Nothing more than letdown. On the very same day, 3 other board members stood down. The reorganization plan that resulted in my firing had the personal approval of one of them, Karen Wexler. Citing health reasons and a need to spend more time with family, she announced her resignation. There is no need to apologize. Absence of ownership. However, her revelation was no longer needed by the world. More so than any remark made in a boardroom, the records spoke for themselves. Raymond gave a call at about noon. The rate of progress is faster than I expected, he remarked. Several counts of conspiracy obstruction and securities fraud have been brought against Callister. The DOJ has just stepped in. I moaned. The Justice Department. I think so. A foundation was established by the SEC. DOJ is bringing it to a successful conclusion. How about the rest? There is cooperation between 2 board members. Quickly following suit, though, was another Richard Ellis. It could crack wide open if he flips. As a reporter pointed to Aerotech's offices behind her, I let out a deep breath and stared at the muted TV. Is Linda all right? Raymond softly inquired. I was hesitant. I am not sure, I confessed. The feeling I was expecting was relief, perhaps vindicated. But instead of that, I feel as though I'm standing amidst the rubble of something that I had a hand in creating. Raymond took his time reassuring me. Words sat on his tongue. There are moments when doing what's right doesn't feel like winning, he eventually said. Yet still, it isn't incorrect. A letter-thick cardboard hand-delivered Aerotech letterhead, embossed in silver, arrived at my doorstep 2 days thereafter. The board's formal apologies was enclosed. It was unique. It was unfiltered by public relations. On a personal level, failure's retribution and a culture of silence that had grown under their leadership were all recognized. My work was acknowledged. I had forewarned them about that. The fact that they paid no attention. 5 years' income, retroactive pension vesting, and complete lifetime healthcare coverage were all part of the official settlement offer. In lieu of bribery, yet as compensation nonetheless. Most significantly, they extended an invitation for me to help with the reconstruction. We would be truly grateful if you could assist us in conceptualizing a brand new framework for ethics oversight, it stated. My response was delayed. No, I got behind the wheel instead. By the primary school where Erica had waited, on the steps of her oversized satchel hanging loosely from her shoulders, up the road from the chapel where Mark and I had spoken our vows beneath a maple tree long ago before disease ruined our dreams, after Aerotech has departed. Protesters had gathered outside at this point. Not irate mobs, but rather quieter gatherings with placards. Reality is vital. Arding at the top, accountability must follow. Also, this one completely halted me. Linda, I am much obliged. I came to a stop, led a long, lifeless existence. I am observing, thinking back. I hadn't desired this. Headlines and handshakes weren't things I had requested. All I wanted was for my opinion to be heard. I was present in a federal courtroom a week later when Callister filed his guilty plea. He glanced around the room for a second before locking eyes with me. He appeared less arrogant than before. He seems calm. He appeared to be a man who had come to terms with the fact that his entire foundation of dishonesty was sand. Thanks to the plea, the judge accepted. A fall sentencing date was set. Microphones were set up outside. The cameras turned. Instead, I persisted in my footsteps. Remarks abated. Avoid doing interviews. The plot had been planned out in advance. Upon returning home, I noticed a change in the wind. Less heavy. Not because fairness had miraculously resolved all issues. The reason being that the truth had won the actual verified and indisputable truth. Upon my arrival, I found Erica already at the kitchen table, engrossed in her laptop work, her head cocked upwards. He's done, she announced. I am aware. Will you be all right? For a time, I considered. I ain't far behind. She rose from her seat, walked around the table, and embraced me tightly. Everything will be all right, Mom. Plus, it had been an extremely long time since I had believed her. Even though time had passed 6 months later, I still hadn't moved on. Certainly not due to my impasse. Not because I was unable to release it, but the quieter reckoning which takes place inside your own chest becomes apparent after the headlines cease screaming and the dust settles. Was it worthwhile type of questions? On a daily basis, I would wonder that same thing as I brewed my coffee in the peaceful kitchen of my new lakeside cottage, a little dwelling not far from Columbia, Missouri. Simple, serene, and unassuming. Additionally, my own. Though it arrived, the money was never the aim. I received a sizable reward from the SEC as a whistleblower equal to 15% of the overall penalty that Aerotech was fined. I had more financial security than I could have imagined because to the board's extra settlement, my reinstated benefits, and my full pension. but it wouldn't undo the years I wasted on a corporation that forgot my name until it was too late. Regardless, I remained unbitter. Yes, absolutely. Unclouded by distractions. Definitive on the irrelevant. In any formal position, I had declined Aerotech's invitation to return. Their newly renamed Ethics and Accountability Division sought my advice and ultimately appointed me as its head. Defined it as symbolic. Healing, a new beginning. I preferred not to be their emblem, though. I was embarrassed to be the visage they used to show stockholders when they said, "See, we've changed." I turned down that offer in favor of another completely unexpected one. In an effort to strengthen whistleblower safeguards in all industries, the SEC extended an invitation for me to serve on a task committee. They said they needed me because I had lived it even though I wasn't an attorney or a policymaker. Yes, I consented. That was a game changer. In the months that followed, I was instrumental in revising the intake process, creating brand new policies about privacy, instructing less experienced investigators on the nature and scope of retaliation. In hallways instead of courtrooms, a number of universities hosted my lectures. During conferences on compliance, during ethics workshops, I encountered a lot of young people who were exactly like me, idealistic, perceptive, and still convinced that the system was effective simply because it was meant to. I have always been honest whenever I have stood at the platform. You can't just turn a switch and be honest whenever it suits you. Just a pose, a backbone, a choice you make repeatedly, even when no one is looking, particularly when no one is looking because it is your choice. In memory of Mark, I have set up a scholarship fund to support women who are interested in working for companies that are held accountable. With Erica's assistance, I laid the groundwork. She had returned to Missouri, perhaps just temporarily at first, but eventually remained. Claimed she yearned for intimacy, requested some time alone to reflect. She turned to me one weekend as we walked along the beach and announced, "I applied to law school." As I was about to walk forward, I froze. Her lips curled into a grin. Law pertaining to corporations. Focus on ethics. In the fall I begin. My voice froze. Will need some time. Tears trickled down my cheeks as I embraced her. I was taken aback by her unexpected question that she asked me at supper that night. "Enjoy or lament it," she spoke. "Did you remain at Aerotech for that entire time, the whole ordeal you endured?" My heart slowed, reflected thoughtfully. "Please place my fork aside." "No," I responded. The individuals around me failed to fulfill their duties, and I had to bear the burden of something they were too afraid or self-centered to handle. And for that, I am sorry. Still, I'm glad I stayed. It was work that I am glad I did. I am content with being the one who finally said enough. As she took it all in, she nodded slowly. "You were the one who taught me that," she remarked. "Do not use lectures in the face of adversity." And there was the solution I had no idea I needed. The battle for honesty isn't about making news. This is all about leaving a lasting difference. It's about demonstrating to yourself, your children, and your colleagues that you stand by your principles and won't compromise them. Even if it's comforting to be quiet, it hurts. While doing the right thing won't automatically get you a prize, it will ensure something far more valuable. Calm down. Many business schools used the Aerotech affair as an example. A word of caution in morality classes, an item for the compliance training checklist. Some pieces I read used words like instrumental, heroic, and a lone voice to characterize me. No, I didn't consider myself a hero. It was as if I were a lady who had grown weary of remaining silent, a woman who made the conscious decision to stand up for what she believed in, even when it was uncomfortable, unpopular, or otherwise unappealing. I was once referred to as just a compliance officer. Right now, this time around, they learned their lesson. Amidst the cold, I perused Aerotech's annual report. It boasted a lot of great things, such new models of oversight, independent audits, and changes to company culture. While I didn't buy into every word, I did see a shift. The genuine article. Ones that can be measured. Those reports are still being sent to me, possibly due to habit, most likely due to feelings of shame, perhaps as an expression of regret. I peruse them, I make a mess of them, I send them back with brief remarks. Traditions persist. While Erica's kid slept inside my wife, and I sat on the porch one night, watching the stars and listening to the wind caress the sea. She asked her mother, "I think I finally get it," as she sipped from her mug. "I don't understand why you lingered after all that, why you persisted through the difficult times instead of giving up, why," I asked with a hint of a smile on my face. "Why? Because you thought the truth mattered, that it eventually sinks, settles, and changes things, regardless of how long it takes." My heart was filled in an indescribable way as I gazed at her. She had a point. There is value in telling the truth. It may lose some fights, still it's never insignificant. And on sometimes, that suffices. To whoever it may concern, the lone worker in an office, perplexed by an incomprehensible screen, seeing sounds that don't add up and fearing that no one else is paying attention. Yes, you are not. Don't freak out. There's no need to exaggerate. There are those who can relate. Be careful to document everything. Talk slowly. Listen to your gut. Never assume that being silent will keep you safe, for the simple reason that the power of a single voice may change everything. Indeed it did, and should the need arise, take it as your own.